And our first speaker this afternoon is Dr. Safron Rossi. And I told Safron earlier this afternoon that I really am I'm just thrilled about her. Think where she is right now in her life, and then what the future is for her and for the work that we all love for archetypal psychology. And I just think that's such a joy and such a blessing to imagine it. You're going to hear today a little bit about Joseph Campbell and about James Hillman. And I told Safron earlier, I had Joseph Campbell come to the University of Dallas campus. Maybe Randy and I'm not sure who might have been there. It was in the early 70s. And he came as a speaker to the University of Dallas. And it was quite traumatic. I won't go into that. But he did stay at my house, and my children were very small. He had just come from Africa, and he brought a little thumb piano, which we still have. But what a joy to know him. And then to know that you sort of grew up with his archives, as you have grown up with James Hillman's archives. In fact, you are head of you're the curator, you have been curator at the Opus Archives and Research Center, which holds the Hillman manuscript collection, which I think is just extraordinary. What a thing to have access to that. Now, your studies have been mostly in Greek mythology, in archetypal psychology, in astrology, in the goddess traditions, and in feminist studies. So we have a lot to talk about together. Safron is co-editor of Jung on Astrology, which she just came out this year, and editor of Joseph Campbell's Goddesses, Mysteries of the Feminine, Divine, and she's on the core faculty at Pacifica. She received her MA, where she received her MA and Ph.D. So we are so eager to hear you talk to us, Dr. Rossi.
Thank you for inviting me back out again this year. It's a pleasure to be here in Dallas and in this community and in this conversation. So the time is a-ticking. As Gail introduced me, I had the enormous privilege of working in the archives where Joseph Campbell's collection and James Hillman's collection were. I was there in the archives for a decade. And so for this weekend's event, I found myself drawn to the last piece in the Mythic Figures volume, which is called Myth as Hero, because here Campbell and Hillman are together. And it makes me think of how Campbell and Hillman's collections for a long time lived in a room together underground. So it's almost like a midnight archive conversation. So the thread I want to pull on has to do with myth as hero. So to both better understand the archetypal ground of the hero through Campbell and further amplify Hillman's idea of myth itself as hero. Because the hero is, in a way, a myth maker. And so I want to explore how these two concepts of the mythic perspective and the hero as myth maker overlap. So the hero is probably one of the archetypal figures we're most familiar with. The hero's journey has also become common parlance in psychology, education, business development, script writing. This is a very well-used form. And we are also well used to the striving, action-oriented, courageous characters who, through sheer force of will and heart, make it, whatever it is, happen. Yeah? And for a long time, Hillman understood the hero as the figure that most personified ego consciousness, the mode by which we tend to navigate life with a tenuous sense of control, order, might, and mission. But this is the secular hero, which is not aware of the multiplicity of the psyche, mistaking itself for all that there is. That's the hero in service to itself, its own being, what I call the secular hero. But that is not the archetypal ground of the hero. As Campbell says, it is the one who endures self-achieved submission. That's his line. By surrendering to a deeper call. So the core of the hero is surrender, and they personify the value of being in service to the gods. Now, saying being in service to the gods is a mythopoetic way of talking about life values. The gods, mythic figures, personify the values in our life that are most essential. That's why we talk about the gods as styles of consciousness or qualities of consciousness. They are guiding values that affect our faculties of perception, our ways of thinking and understanding what's happening. So Campbell presents the hero as the mythological figure that represents the model of the human spirit that connects to the universal archetypal realm by undergoing a change of consciousness. Psychologically, self-achieved submission means the hero that submits to the inner realm of the psyche and endures a change not only in their conscious life, but in their unconscious or psychic life. So the archetypal pattern of the hero's journey gives us all those fantastic variations, these dramatic weavings of the call to adventure, the crossing of thresholds, the great battles, the confrontations, and then the return with the treasure. And it's when the hero returns from this journey and re-enters civilization, the return, that the hero becomes a mythmaker. So it's Hillman that reminds us that the original hero served culture and civilization, because in either founding or mending, fixing the city, the hero becomes part of its founding myth. Therefore, the hero serves the city's gods. And Hillman says, civilization requires a hero myth. In fact, is built upon that myth. And so we find, looking in the tradition, that heroes were the link or the bridge between the mortals and the immortals. And most often they themselves are both human and divine. And in fact, in Homer, hero means born of God and mortal. So in the Greek tradition, in Greek myth, we've got Perseus, Hercules, Heracles, Theseus, all of these heroic figures that are both often the children of Zeus, the most fecund one, and then some mortal or nymphy feminine figure. So the hero who serves the gods founds civilization. This is how the gods, with their transpersonal values, are linked to human life. Which I guess is another way we could say the psyche needs ordering in terms of deep principles. So in this way, civilization, or the mythic city, is a metaphor for what it is to live by ultimate values. And to me, that's what Hillman means when he calls the hero an emissary of the gods. So two things. First, the hero cannot be reduced to the modern secular ego. And second, Campbell's recovery of the myth of the hero and the revaluing of myth in life shows us that the hero is a force of deep principles. So this is returning the hero to its archetypal background. The hero personifies values of civilization, service, liberation from oppression, and is an intermediary of the gods. And so going back to Campbell, he talks about the hero's journey as being this metaphor for life. What he called the monomyth, but I think we can forgive him for that, because what he really meant was this from a psyche-oriented way. And as you probably know, and a little nod to Gustavo, the hero's journey always requires a death. In the myths, this can be the journey to the underworld, being in the belly of the beast, falling asleep in a strange land, literally being killed, dismembered. But there's a dying. There's a dying to the outer world and being born a second time from within. So this twice born or rebirth theme is present in all mythologies of transformation. Transformation means change. And these are symbolic expressions of the second birth to a different consciousness. Being born again, seeing anew, one that sees underneath the surface of our everyday fears and desires. I mean, that's Campbell's way of talking about this second birth. So this twice-born consciousness, which Campbell also called spiritual birth, or second birth, which made one capable of hearing the song of the muses, as Campbell says, is what I understand that Hillman meant by facing the gods. So this is a quote from him on that book that I wish would get reprinted. Please, Facing the Gods, someone reprint that book. So this is Hillman. For as the individual in search of his or her soul soon discovers, the soul is entangled in myths, so that uncovering the figures of myths become more and more psychologically pertinent. We are learning what other cultures always knew. To know ourselves, we must know the gods and goddesses of myth. We must face the gods. And facing the gods requires backward turning. And this is what Hillman called epistrophe, which is a reversion through likeness. And this movement, epistrophe, is a method, he says, that connects an event to its image, a psychic process to its myth. Listen to this line. A suffering of the soul to the imaginal mystery therein. Epistrophe, or the return through likeness, offers to psychological understanding a main avenue for recovering order from the confusion of psychic phenomenon. Okay, so myth is the hero in the sense that when grounded in the reality of the gods, myth is the emissary of the gods and its values. And myth in this sense is liberating because it helps us make order of psychic life. Liberation from the massa confusa of our inner states and their analogous outer circumstances. So myth is the hero in that it makes order of psychic mess and reveals the values or gods necessary for us to serve. Myths help us identify right altars. In other words, myths provide images. And this, I think, is liberating too, because we are freed from what sometimes feels like a tyrannical, monocle vision of the ego's point of view into a more kind of kaleidoscopic multivalence of the multiple values and at times competing, conflicting values that comprise our lives. So what I'd like to do is amplify this idea of myth as hero mythically. So returning the hero to its archetypal background and the values of civilization and service, we find ourselves in the temple precinct of Athena. She's been discussed quite a bit in our gatherings, so a few brief points to this. Her domain being the polis, the well-tended community and its civilizing order. And where there is a valuing of civilization and public good, we can imagine that being held within Athena's wide, uncracked bowl, Hillman says. The olive tree and all of its uses as being fundamental to Greek life, food, oil, trade, fire, heat, shade. Any of you that have been to Greece realize that without the olive tree, there would be no Greek people. That's Athena in her nurturing capacity, the necessity of the olive. And then there's also the attributes of weaving the yoke and bridle that allows for taming and working with animals. So these few little pieces of her domain. And Hillman tells us too that the hero is the imaginal force within the inspiration of great deeds and public good. And I would say that this at the same time is what propitiates Athena. So unfolds the deeper reason of Athena's place as counselor to heroes, Heracles, Theseus, Achilles, Jason, and beloved Odysseus, one of the greatest heroes of epic ancient literature of the Greeks. Now, Walter Otto, an amazing classicist, he wrote this regarding Athena in the Odyssey. She herself tells Odysseus what it is that distinguishes them and binds them together. Athena speaks, "Of all mankind, thou art easily foremost, both in counsel and in speech. And among all gods, I win fame for my wit and cleverness." So these values are qualities of the strategic mind, which Odysseus excels in his polymetos, or his sort of multiplicitous wit or cleverness. And the other qualities that kind of come from this, that we come to understand being really most valued to Athena, what she most loves in the heroic way, and particularly lived by Odysseus, is gently civilized restraint, which is restraint on the side of reason rather than passion, skillful accuracy in perceptual judgment, and then also self-mastery over impulsive action. Yeah? So whether as a presence and voice that guides Odysseus, or in the guise of mentor guiding Telemachus, or as the guiding hand of Penelope at her loom, weaving and unweaving, Athena is everywhere in the Odyssey. And for Campbell, and this is a chapter in the Goddesses book that I edited. Campbell has a very interesting take on the Odyssey and what it is as a story, or one of its main themes, which he understood to be the reintegration of the feminine and the masculine after that long period of the Iliad and its veneration of the martial, aggressive, masculine gods and patriarchal values, power, war, and women as booty, right? So, and recall that the Trojan War begins at the judgment of Paris. And already in that setup, we see something has gone afoul. Why is a mortal judging who is most fair of the three most sort of powerful goddesses of the pantheon? Something has already shifted in the consciousness to allow what Campbell called a lounge lizard like Paris to sit there and decide to whom do we give this golden apple, right? So the Odyssey for Campbell was this, had to do with the return to the goddess, the return of what we would say are transpersonal feminine values or qualities. And so Campbell goes on to say that the three women that Odysseus meets on his journey to get back home are actually avatars of the three goddesses wronged by Paris. So Calypso is an avatar of Hera, right? The woman he lives with for 7 years on the island. So that's relationship, marriage, compromise. Then Circe, the enchantress, the seductress, the one who knows secret magical arts. Well, that is Aphrodite, or Aphrodite's avatar. And then last but not least, Nausicaa as the avatar of Athena, the young woman who idealizes this hero who has come. So his journey is one of making amends, so to speak, and preparing him to be able to return home to his wife and Ithaca and his family, not as a warrior, but as a husband, a king, a father, right? So in book 6 of the Odyssey, Athena arranges for Nausicaa to decide, to be inspired to wash laundry. So she's inspired to go and wash the laundry. Oh, if only. And it's that morning that Odysseus, has been shipwrecked and thrown onto the beach. And so it's here on Nausicaa's island, which is the island of the Phaeacians, and her father Alcinu and her mother Arete, that Odysseus tells his story. So books 9 through 12 that follow his arrival, we hear about the Cyclops, we hear about Circe, the kingdom of the dead and the cattle of the sun. So, as my old professor and beloved friend and colleague, Dennis Patrick Slattery, taught us well about this epic, it is here on this island that Odysseus is mythologizing himself. He's telling stories about the power of stories, fabricating a narrative that becomes the container for his experience. It's as if Athena sanctions Odysseus' storytelling, as if to say that there is something divine about the crafting or fabrication of narrative. So that's how I want us to consider Pytho, which came up in the other earlier lecture today. Sorry, I'm all in the Odyssey right now. Pytho as persuasive speech or rhetoric, which was one of Athena's gifts. And I think it's the power that lies at the center of the story of Orestes, he who was torn between the gods. There isn't enough time to get into this, but very, very briefly, Orestes is protected by Apollo, but hunted by the Furies, the Erinyes, for killing his mother. And Athena saves Orestes. She's able to heal this division between Apollo and the Furies, because her nature combines the values sacred to both of those gods. Where the Furies are most aligned with necessity, what is fateful, Apollo is aligned with reason, or one aspect of it. So Athena in relationship to necessity, we have all of this imagery of her being the inventor of crafts and the arts that deal with order and limitation, pottery, weaving, measuring, the bridle, the yoke, the harness, everything that holds in, makes ordered. And then related to reason, she's born from her father's head, so she is her father's reason, her father's nous, but also persuasive speech as being the reasoned art. So we find in the play, the telling, that the Furies finally agree to desist in their vengeance of Orestes when Athena promises them a place of worship, a place in the new divine order. And so she says, "By all my rights, I promise you your seat in the depths of the earth, stationed at hearths equipped with glistening thrones, covered with praise. My people will revere you." So the Erinyes, Furies, are transformed from the blind, imageless ones, and it's so fascinating. Anyone that is hunted by the Erinyes, only they can see them. No one else can see the Erinyes haunting them. So it's fascinating. So they're transformed from the Erinyes into the Humanities, which means the kindly ones. So Athena is rooting them in the polis, in civilization. And I think we see this as a reconciliatory move, where necessity is given a place, and that goes directly to the heart of archetypal psychology. So this passage was already read to us earlier today in relationship to addiction. Just wanted to acknowledge that. So in Hillman's piece on Athena and Ananke, he says, "There's a relation, even an inverse proportion, between images and drivenness. The more the image and altar, the less the blind necessity. The more the compulsion, the less we are able to sacrifice to connect our personal compulsion with something divine." So images are like altars, myth, astrology, therapy, all of these various mythopoetic reflective modes or practices are ways of creating images whereby we make sacrifice to the gods and are hopefully less blindly driven. We can then imagine the force, the God, the power that's driving us, and see that the compulsion is essential to, or even inherent in, the very thing that is driving us. So Athena's Pytho moves compulsive acts into words. It's words as images. So Athena gives the Erinyes a place, an image, where sacrifice can be made to them. And I think that, and that's what Hillman says lies at the root of psychotherapy. So myths and their images, their stories, the drama, the characters, the plots, the motifs, the themes, all of it, help us move our compulsions, our psychic messes and confusions into older vessels. And these older vessels sit on the altars of gods. So the mythic way of thinking and the heroic way of being come together in the making of images. So Athena's values of wisdom over appetite, the mind over the belly, this is thoughtful reflection over reactive desire. Storytelling, the weaving of narrative, the art of mythologizing, this is Odysseus who, in telling his tale to Nausicaa and her family, is weaving himself back into life. And he will mend Ithaca upon his return, because that is the hero's task after the journey. So, when we value myth as metaphoric containers for the transpersonal values and principles that govern and animate life, then we really are viewing myth as hero. And grounded in the reality of the gods, myth as hero is their messenger. Thank you.